Some of you have probably already figured out that I'm not originally from Alabama, that I still haven't learned the language very well. And I try to tell people down there that I come from a real, true southern state, but when they ask where, I have to say South Dakota. And I'm coming to learn the language, and I can usually teach classes there without an interpreter anymore, but there's still a lot of things yet to learn. But tonight, let's look at the plan of God in the settlement of this Western Hemisphere and the establishment of the United States of America. And I suggest to you that God's plan was to bring the gospel to the Western Hemisphere and to establish a society that is built upon biblical principles of law and government and economics. That he did so not only for the well-being of the people here in America, but also as an example and as a model for the rest of the world. And the plain fact is, the United States Constitution has been used as a model for the constitutions of dozens of nations, particularly in Latin America, but in fact, all over the world. We need to understand then that the United States is not the kingdom of God. The United States is the best the world has to offer because it is built upon a biblical foundation, built upon principles consistent with God's Word, principles that were brought here by people, most of whom were Christians. Now, obviously, when we think about Columbus and the so-called discovery of America, Columbus was not the first person to come to America. There were Native Americans here before, and as one of them said, we were here before Columbus, and we knew who we were, we knew where we were, and we didn't think we needed to be discovered. And they have a point. There were very possibly others here before Columbus as well. There's good evidence that in the 1400s, the Chinese may have had an expedition on the western coast of America. There is some evidence of Phoenicians, of Celts, Africans, and others. One that is quite clear is that Vikings were in North America around 1000 AD, that this is something that isn't as well known, and that's that they colonized America right after Scandinavia was converted to Christianity. Norway became Christian under King Olaf Tryggvason around 990 AD, and around 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, who was the son of Eric the Red, who was the chieftain of the colonies of Greenland, sailed to Norway to spend a winter with the king, a common custom for the son of a chieftain. And according to Eric's saga, we read, on one occasion the king had a talk with Leif and said, "Are you intending to sail to Greenland this summer?" "Yes," replied Leif, "if you approve." "I think it would be a good idea," said the king. "You are to go there with a mission from me to preach Christianity in Greenland." Leif said it was for the king to command, but added that, in his opinion, the mission would be difficult to accomplish in Greenland. The king replied that he could think of no one better fitted for it than him, and your good luck will see you through. Well, Leif did go back to Greenland. He did preach the gospel in Greenland. Some did not accept Christianity. Probably his father Eric did not, but most did. And those who were outfitted for the expedition to establish the colony in Vinland, which is probably the Lonzo Meadows sites off Newfoundland, were mostly then Christian. But the colony only survived for a few winters, and then they returned. They had a lot of trouble with the native people here. And I suggest the real reason, though, is that even though they were mostly Christian, they showed very little interest in evangelizing the native population. They spoke disparagingly of them, using terms like "skrellings" for them, and I suggest that may be why God did not bless the Norse colonies in North America. But then we come to Christopher Columbus in 1492. Now, look at conditions in Europe at the time this is taking place. We see, first of all, that particularly among the Franciscans in the Catholic Church, there was a strong belief that the end of the world was near and that Christ was coming soon. There was a strong belief that the gospel needed to be spread throughout the earth, particularly to Asia and Africa, and many times they were unaware of just how much of Africa had been Christianized in the past and civilized in the past. As far as getting the gospel to Africa and to Asia, there was a barrier, and that was the Islamic Empire. The Crusades had been fought over various issues there concerning repelling Muslim advances to the west as well as recapturing territory. And then in the 1400s, we see the rise of the Ottoman Turks. We see the fall of Constantinople in 1453, at which time Columbus would have been a small boy. But also at this time, we see what was called Reconquista, that is, the desire of Christians in Spain to recover Spain for Christianity, because even into the early 1400s, most of Spain was still in Muslim hands. Finally, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella united the northern kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. They began their crusade of Reconquista. Finally, on the 2nd of January, 1492, the last Muslim stronghold, the Alhambra in the city of Granada, surrendered. And at this point, they turned to Columbus and they said, okay, now you were talking to us about sailing west to China. Now that this is done, we're interested. And so the expedition took place. Obviously, we've already dispelled the myth that Columbus was the first to discover America. We should also note that Columbus did not prove the world was round. No educated person in 1492 had any doubt that the world was round. In fact, Eratosthenes, the Greek philosopher and mathematician, about 500 BC had calculated the circumference of the earth at 25,000 miles. Amazingly accurate. No, Columbus's argument with the Salamanca Commission had to do with the size of the earth. And they were right, and Columbus was wrong. Columbus misunderstood what Ptolemy had meant when he spoke about a degree of longitude and latitude. He therefore underestimated the size of the earth by about 25%. He overestimated the size of the Eurasian continent based on reading Marco Polo, and if I'd ridden my horse all the way from Italy to China, I'd probably overestimate it too. But so Columbus sees a globe that's about 25% smaller than it really is, sees Europe and Asia kind of wrapping around it, and then sees the Atlantic Ocean between China and Spain as being about what it actually is from Spain to North America. Frankly, if he hadn't made that miscalculation, he would probably never have gone on the expedition. If he had really known how far it was to go around the world, he probably would never have tried. So perhaps God willfully allowed him to remain in ignorance on that. But the third thing is that Columbus did not sail merely for wealth or for fame or for power. Not going to say that his motives were pure. Nobody's are in this world, I suppose. And Columbus had to have 3 ships, had to outfit them with provisions for a crew, and pay that crew in advance for an expedition that may well last a couple of years. That takes a lot of money. And if you're going to interest investors in this, you're going to have to find ways of making it profitable, or this will be your last expedition. What I suggest to academics sometimes when they criticize Columbus for being greedy is try thinking of it as a research grant, and then maybe it makes sense. No, Columbus's real purpose was to reach the people of Asia with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Part of the concern in Europe at this time was being surrounded by the power of Islam. Henry the Navigator, the Prince of Portugal, spoke of the establishment of a worldwide Christian order to combat the force of Islam, and spoke of the need to sail around Africa so we could reach Asia with the gospel. Columbus was saying, you want to reach Asia with the gospel? It's a lot shorter way of doing it. Just sail straight west. You'll be there before you know it. But Columbus wrote in his book of prophecies in 1502 concerning his reasons for the execution of the journey to the Indies. I did not make use of intelligence, mathematics, or maps. It is simply the fulfillment of what Isaiah prophesied. And he goes extensively into Old Testament prophecy as well as New Testament in explaining the need to reach the world with the gospel, because in his view, the end was near. Now, he had a regular journal that he kept, and in his entry for the 12th of October, 1492, it was a real coincidence that he happened to land right on Columbus Day. But his entry for that day, as he landed on that island that he named San Salvador, or Holy Savior, probably it was Watling Island, he said, in order that they might develop a very kindly disposition toward us, because I knew that they were a people who could better be freed and converted to our holy faith by love than by force, gave some of them red caps, to others glass beads, which they hung on their necks, and many other things of slight value, in which they took much pleasure. They remained so much our friends that it was a marvel. I believe that they would easily be made Christians, because it seemed to me that they belonged to no religion. Well, he found that they did belong to a very macabre religion of human sacrifice and cannibalism, but he had no way of knowing this at that time. But as he continues the expedition there, he says 4 days later, on the 16th of October, I believe they would easily be made Christians, because they are of very good understanding. In other words, he's not saying these people are dummies and we can fool them. He's saying they're smart people. And if we can reach them with the gospel, teach them through their language, they'll become Christian. And many of them did. Now, Columbus made a lot of mistakes. He certainly was not perfect. He probably should never have been made governor of the Indies. Admiral of the Ocean Sea was a much better title for his personal abilities, but that's hindsight, of course. But it is very clear from his words and from his actions that his heart was for the gospel. Well, then we have others. We can talk about so many other explorers that came to this land, but particularly the Spanish at this time. Magellan is one that is particularly interesting, and one of the things that I find particularly shocking about Magellan is the way he is treated in modern history. We know that Magellan is supposed to be the first man who sailed around the world, although he didn't complete the voyage. He died in the Philippines. His crew completed it, though, and so he can take credit for having completed that voyage. But if you read through the encyclopedia will say about that voyage that he took great pride in converting the native populations to his religion. Notice how they put it. He took great pride in doing that. Not that he was concerned about their souls, or that he wanted to extend to them the plan of salvation, or he was obeying the commission. No, he took great pride. But then it goes on to say, but he involved himself in a quarrel among tribes which led to his death. Well, that is technically true, but it's not the full story. What happened was that one of those tribes in the Philippines came to Jesus Christ. They became Christians. And as a result, a larger tribe was going to wipe them out, and it was making war on them. Magellan's advisors on the ship told him, we really need to get out of here. Magellan said, we can't. We led these people to Christ. We are the ones who put them in the danger they're in right now. We have a duty to stand by them. And he did. He fought for those people, and he gave his life for them. Very different from the way it is pictured in history. One of the most fascinating men in all history, and possibly the most underrated man in the history of the Western Hemisphere, is Hernando Cortez. And when we look to the mission of Cortez, we find his concern was reaching people with the gospel as well. In fact, the thing you find so interesting here is that the first thing Cortez did when he landed there at this little place that he named Veracruz, or True Cross, was sink all 16 of his ships. That was his way of saying to his men, we are in this to the finish, and if we fail, there is going to be no plan B. Now, Montezuma and the Aztecs had a most powerful empire. His empire consisted of somewhere between 15 and 30 million subjects, in addition to which he had conquered some 30 vassal states. His own army, including its reserve forces, could be swelled up to as many as 3 million. And he could also, he said, summon 50,000 warriors from each of the 30 vassal states at any time at his command. Cortez landed with a total of 500 men. They had a few cannons, but these were very primitive weapons and quickly rendered unusable. They weren't modern howitzers. They had about 16 muskets, and these were only single-shot muskets. They weren't AK-47s or M16s or anything like this. Their armor was generally leather armor, not steel. Really only the horsemen, about 16 of them, had steel armor. Their swords were their best weapons. The Aztec warriors also had swords, but they were sharp and lethal, but being made out of flint, they were not as sturdy as the Spanish steel. But 500 versus an army of hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. What is it that is the cause of Cortez's success? Well, several things. One, the fact that he brought the gospel. His foot soldier, Bernal Diaz, in his 5-volume work titled The Conquest of New Spain, describes some of the things that happened, and his account of the conquest is possibly the best. Lopez de Gamarra, Cortez's personal chaplain, also has a very good account. But when they're there at Veracruz, within 48 hours, Montezuma already has had runners come to him with sketches showing him what Cortez looks like, what their ships were like, and the armor they wore, and so on. And he had ambassadors there to meet with them. And Bernal Diaz describes one event. He says, "It was now the time of the Ave Maria, and at the sound of a bell which we had in the camp, we all fell on our knees before a cross placed on a sand hill, and said our prayers of the Ave Maria before the cross. When Tendil and Ptalpatoc, that's Montezuma's ambassadors, saw us thus kneeling, as they were very intelligent, they asked what was the reason that we humbled ourselves before a tree cut in that particular way." By the way, if I told you the whole story of how they developed a system of interpreters, that's a miracle by itself. I'll move on here. As Cortez heard this remark, he said to the Padre de la Merced, who was present, "It is a good opportunity, Father, as we have good material at hand, to explain to our interpreters matters touching our holy faith." And then he delivered a discourse to the caciques, that is, nobles, so fitting to the occasion that no good theologian could have bettered it. After telling them that we were Christians and relating all matters pertaining to our holy religion, he told them that their idols were not good but evil things, which would take flight at the presence of the sign of the cross, and that for on a similar cross, the Lord of heaven and earth and all created things suffered passion and death. That is, he whom we adore and in whom we believe, our true God, Jesus Christ, who had been willing to suffer and die in order to save the whole human race, that on the third day he rose again and is now in heaven, and that by him we shall all be judged. Cortez said many other things, very well expressed, which they thoroughly understood, and they replied that they would report them to their prince, Montezuma, which in fact they did shortly thereafter. Now, let's explain a couple of things about the Aztecs. They were an absolutely remarkable civilization. We can see from the structures that they had built, from the hanging gardens, the zoological gardens that they had, the great temples. They had special schools for military officers. They were a remarkable society. They had a mathematical system far in advance of anything in Europe at the time, a much more accurate calendar, a better sanitation system. Mexico City was a larger and better fortified city than any city in Europe except possibly the Alhambra. In so many ways, they were remarkable. But